Hey, I'm Richard Russell, your host. Today we're talking to Janie Links, and Janie is one of the best people I know. And what I mean by that is that she helps scale up companies like the companies that I help work with. She helps them with people strategy, and that includes things like hiring, things like setting up a hiring pipeline, leveling, all of the things that are related to people, HR, that kind of thing, talent acquisition, talent plans, all of that. And she's someone who I met at some years ago at Google. But we caught up again not that long ago, maybe a year ago, and she helped me with my business just in terms of her own ability to coach and help me understand what I was doing. And we worked together on a couple of clients. So what I'll do is I'll bring her on the screen. Where are you? Janie, there you are. Add right. Janie, hey, how you doing? Great to see you again.
Hi, Richard. Morning.
Morning. We met at Google, I think it was about 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago now. I don't know. Maybe I'm older than I think I am. But we met about that back then when you were doing some hiring for the group that I was part of, PSO. And yeah, do you recall working with us with Google back then?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it was back in 2006. So I think Google had 200 people in the London office. They wanted to bring talent in-house and do this headhunting thing and not just have people to them. I mean, my goodness, how the world has changed. But yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then since then you've moved on from there and you've worked at Trainline and various other companies. I don't know. I haven't got your list right in front of me, but various other companies, and now you're independent doing people strategy. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. I about 2.5 years ago, I set up High Calibre People to provide strategic people advice to scaling tech companies and leaders. So I offer advisory work, consulting work where I go in and help them in deep dive projects, and also I'm a trained executive and EQ coach.
Yeah, that's why. Like this is when we caught up about whenever it was a year or so ago. I recall you giving me some really good advice on my own business, and in fact, I think that I was reviewing your website as well and helping you set up the web.
Exactly. You reciprocated beautifully because the key message that you gave to me was, what customer problems are you solving?
Yeah,
You
yeah.
kept focusing on the customer rather than just stating what I wanted to do or what I think I was offering. You were really honing in the customer problem, maybe from your Amazon
Yeah,
background.
there's a bit of that. I mean, Amazon has that attitude. That's certainly one of the places I've got that from, and just the product background as well. But I mean, even and I recall that your point of view with me was largely about helping me overcome my at that time I was going through a bit of a low point because I was struggling with my business and struggling with getting customers and struggling to figure out how to make this work as a business. And your encouragement really helped turn me around. There's a few people who helped turn me around, and yours was one of them. It was like, just focusing on your strengths and what you can do, and there's a series of things there that I can't remember the actual words you said, but the feeling that I got from that was actually a boost in confidence that enabled me to help me go forwards and actually build a business. And now I have a business that actually I'm really proud of and it works. So that was great. But it's good to have those exchanges and sort of coach each other on that. But let's talk more about you, because this is mostly about you and what you're doing and things like that. I'd love to just hear you talk about what sort of clients you work with now and how they're different from the work that you did at Google wasn't a massive part of your earlier life, but you say you spent a lot of time at Trainline. But how it's different working for the kind of clients you work for now and compared to what you were used to do.
So I've worked for three. I've worked in house in talent and people leadership roles in three different companies, and broadly speaking, they all fall into the same scale up phase. So the 200 or so up to about 1,000. Um, so the similarity with what I'm doing now is the same in terms of company size, although I do also support Series A businesses. So, I mean, it's much harder nowadays to define the size of company by the series of investment, but generally speaking, it's any company from about 100 person up, where really they're at the juncture of going, gosh, we've put in lots of the operational basics, and it's when the leaders start to ask more strategic questions. Goodness, we don't just want to do a tactical soft engagement piece on culture, or we don't just want to hire 10, 20 people. We really want to start to build, I use the words with pluses and minuses, but the build engines to across our people spectrum, to build engines to make the people agenda work really well. So I think there's a lot of similarity in size. Yeah.
One of the things that I recall you talking about early on in our conversations in the past has been about this whole idea of like you're trying to understand what people are trying to achieve. Like a lot of people leaders that I've come across focused on, certainly in larger companies, it tends to be a bit of an administrative and compliance type focus, process type focus. But even in a lot of other companies, I've seen people focusing purely on the team happiness side of things, or on the people's fulfillment, which is really important. But what I found really interesting with you is that you talked about what are you trying to achieve as a business? What's the business goal? And that's the starting point. Is that what you tend to do when you go into a client when they first?
100%. I mean, whether a company, and often not actually, but whether they have a people plan in place or a people strategy, or they've even got people objectives for a quarter, whether they do or they don't, I want to know, partly in how I'm driven, that the work that I want to do, I want to have impact. So I want to know that it's going to be connected back to business success. Now, the old cliche of people are our greatest asset, and we can't, and certainly in pure play tech companies, we can't, people are our second, if not biggest investment in the company behind technology, and all these good adages. But actually, for me, the commerciality comes from the fact that I've come through a talent background before broadening into HR. Because being in talent, well, this is my hypothesis anyway, being in talent, you have to, or certainly I always absolutely need to understand the business models. If I'm going to help somebody move into a particular company, it wasn't just about the role or the function. It was like, well, what's the business trying to do? So that broader business awareness piece has always been there for me. So I don't actively do it as part of a rigid plan. It's my curiosity that takes over, because it seems quite obvious to me to ask. No, I don't know. I come from, my parents were entrepreneurs in terms of always working in their own businesses. We've always talked business. It was a business household, so maybe it comes from there too.
Excellent. Well, I mean, I'm hoping that same attitude rubs off on my children. I'm running my business, and my wife works for Amazon still, but she certainly has a very business mind, and we hope that same attitude rubs off on our children, because it's super valuable, just in terms of like the thinking when you go into a company, trying to understand what's really happening. But when you say you're in talent, that, just to clarify for people who aren't using those words frequently, what you mean there is talent acquisition, like recruiting, is that right?
It's talent acquisition. I came through the headhunting route in my career, and originally, way back when, worked for a niche search firm that focused on headhunting people from the top tier strategy firms and placing them in corporate development M&A roles within technology companies, well, as one particular niche. So that's how I ended up in the internet space way back when.
That's how you ended up at Google at the same time as me, and you were there for like 4 years or so, I guess. But
I was there for about 3 years, yeah.
3 years, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And you learn how to hire at Google. There's a lot under your belt to be able to take elsewhere. Certainly at that time, is not just the pace of hiring and the volume, but the quality of hire. And for me, my business name is, perhaps as cliched as it sounds, isn't a mistake. I really do believe in finding the best possible people. Well, I should probably clarify, I don't offer exec search as part of my offering. I facilitate other people's processes, but what I spend my time doing from a talent point of view is connecting their business strategy to what people they need in the org.
Yeah.
Getting under the cover of what's the right capabilities, profiles, backgrounds, experience that they need to help make the business successful.
So that means that people bring you in not when they say, "Oh, I need to hire a person to do this." Let's ask Janie, because that will be what you'd use you'd find a headhunter or a search consultant to do that, which is a different business. When do you come in? When does someone say? When does a typical client actually go, "Gosh, I need to hire Janie to help with this"? What's the pain? What's the pain that they have?
So I mean, we're touching on talent acquisition. So to stay there for a bit longer, the key pain points there are, how do I hire at pace? How do I hire the right quality at the right time? How do I qualify the hiring plans I've got? And that's really about unearthing how strong your engine is. So you can say, I need to hire 50 engineers at once. or immediately or in the next quarter. And we know, we can come on to market challenges, but we know lots of market challenges exist. But, there's still, businesses will still going to need to hire 50 engineers, or maybe 100, 200, but a sizable number. If you don't have the talent team in place, or the right capability to deliver that hiring, it's very clunky, it's very ad hoc, and the quality often isn't consistent. So actually building that talent engine ahead of time is one of the best things a company can do. So talent acquisition engine building is a really key pain point. I think companies also, I find, come to me when they recognize the need to change. So they're on a growth trajectory, or they're changing tack somehow. And the CEO or the founder is saying to me, perhaps when I'm in an advisory capacity, look, do I have the right leaders in place to achieve these growth plans? How do we organize ourselves in terms of the design and the structure of the org, and to effectively work together?
Yeah. So it's very much like we have a problem. We know that it's in some ways it's kind of similar to the kinds of problems that someone would want to engage me for. It's just a little bit different area, different domain. But it's basically like when we're growing, we've been growing faster. We need to grow faster than we have done, or we're not as efficient as we could be with the people we have, and we need to figure out why not, and what do we need to do, especially with the leader side. And so you kind of got leaders, and you got the talent that you're working with as well. But you've got both parts of this part. And you're trying to figure out, people are trying to figure out, like, this isn't, we're not, are we well equipped enough to go forward with the people we have? And can we get the people we need to go forward? And what kind of people do we need? That's basically it, right?
100%. Exactly. And then I think beyond that, though, it's also then, okay, if we're broadly happy with the people that we've got, which you hope is the starting point, unless there's some key other questions that need to be asked. If we're broadly happy with the people we've got, actually, how are we working together? So, I mean, certainly across leadership team ways of working, I spend quite a lot of time facilitating and coaching leadership teams on how to improve in this area, and their ways of working as a unit. And, it's quite easy to opt for, well, let's get them leadership development. And, there's absolutely a really beneficial place for that. But there's a bit before that says, actually, what's the problem we're diagnosing amongst the leadership team, or amongst the gaps in our business? And then how do we creatively solve for that because of the market conditions? Yeah.
So really is go back to the customer, go back to the real problem, and then figure out what the problem is. And now we figure out, okay, now you need to set up a hiring engine. Now you need to set or a talent acquisition engine. Now you need to re-understand what people you need in your team, or how your team is working together, your leadership team, that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's quite interesting when you think about the org plan piece, because and the hiring plan. So clients come with different stages of that. Sometimes businesses go, we know we need to hire, but we don't know where. Help us build a hiring plan. So that's not just, hey, everyone, how many engineers do you want? It's the justification for their understanding of what they need.
Yeah.
And I think the role that I often find myself helping companies with is, what's the dependencies on the ratios if needed, but certainly the dependencies between roles that you need to have in the business to make the workflow work. So, for example, I need to hire 50 engineers. Okay, well, how many POs do you need for 50 engineers? How many designers? UX, UI. How many QA do you need if that's not part of the full stack program?
In that context, do you often work with the whole transition from sort of project or just pure tech development without product managers to a more product-led organization? And how do you help with that? Because in some ways, that's something that some of my clients struggle with, because they've often come from the CEO is effectively the product manager, because they've developed the company and they're growing to a scale of where they're like, okay, now we've hired some people, we've got some product managers, but how do I even set up my product function, and do I have this right? And it's quite a big transition, because I'm suddenly delegating a lot of my power, a lot of the responsibility to this team of people who I've hired, and then that's the part that drives the whole engineering piece of, like, how do we make sure that that's the engineering piece, which is a huge expense, is creating the right kind of value for our customers. Are you involved in that part as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it comes up a lot, as we often smile about. I mean, finding the right level of healthy tension between product and tech is essential, right? How the how the two functions work together, whether they're under the same leadership or not, may or may not matter depending on the organization. But having a leader or leaders that are engaging with the teams and what the principles and values are in terms of what type of product org you want is really key. How do you want to work? And sometimes these pieces I find, whether it's in these departments or not, but when you talk about principles, they're often assumed. So a lot of the work that I do is helping shape them amongst the leadership team and then communicate them in the org.
What do you mean by a principle? Like, you mean like a principle of, what's an example?
Do we want to have a flat structure, empowered teams? Do we, what level of agile working do we want to have? Whatever the product ways of working might be.
Yeah.
It's as I say, it's often assumed that we're all going to work in agile, but actually there's a deadline project, and in reality that's a waterfall project and it's not an agile one. So
right.
Should we just no? So it's really unearthing. It's really unearthing what are the themes that are going on within that company at that point that helps communicate to the teams something that will help them work more effectively together.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. It's interesting. I was going to say, I working with a client recently where we have a whole lot of work which is kind of waterfall oriented. In fact, the history is very waterfall oriented. It's very sales led. We sell something, we sign a contract, when we implement all of those things in a sequence of events in a project that has a date at the end of it. And they've got a sort of agile way of working, but it's not that agile. But then they're trying to move to a more product led organization as they go down the path of optimizing their business for the usage, right? So they've signed the contract, now they've got to increase the usage, and now they need product managers, and then they need a much more agile approach. So they've got this weird split in some sense of their work, because they still have all of these clients and contracts and things that they're doing, but then they also have, how do I deliver, how do I work on the usage part so that I'm delivering value to the existing clients, even when they're not asking for new features and so on. So that's interesting, that interesting sort of split situation. And so the work that we're doing is really about setting the right goals, and how do we understand the goals, which largely applies to the product part a bit more than the other part, or it also applies to the transition between these components as well. But I mean, I guess that's the kind of thing where you really have to get your people lined up and understand how your people strategy supports that.
Yeah, how your people strategy supports, and actually, for all the different terminology that exists around that, just know what motivates your people.
Yeah.
Actually, you might have a group of people that are particularly interested in working with and discovering usage cases, or are particularly customer focused.
Yeah.
So it is about leaders understanding their people and their motivation.
Yeah, and I guess also selecting the right people to have the right motivation to fit the business goals, because you've got to start from both of these. You got this end of like, what's the business goal and what am I trying to achieve? But you also have, I have these people, and what do I need to do to get these people to deliver that? Because I can't just literally just change the whole group all at once.
But that's about the leadership qualities. That's about the visionary and the being able to communicate a strategic plan and inspiring people around them, and then taking time to understand. You might not know what motivates you next, but hey, what do you think about this? I see this in you. Have you considered this? Right? And the leader thinking about that, not waiting only for the employee to come with, I want to move up a rank and a level, etc. But you raised an interesting point before when you talk about the sales process, the product business, and then the sales process, coming back to the dependencies on different roles in the org. We often think, as I just illustrated, product and tech and the dependencies that need to exist there. And then we often in growth orgs put marketing into the funnel and making sure we've got marketing and tech syncing. And then beyond that, actually the example you're sharing, if you don't have the right BI and analytics, typically sitting in a finance function or in a data team outside of functional areas, your chain the value chain isn't created.
Interesting.
Because you've got blockers. So just being able to look at the whole organization is really key.
Yeah, it's interesting because like my way of thinking, like my background and the things that I do, That's stuff that I feel is important, but I don't have a framework or a way of thinking about it in a really structured way, because I focus on, I've come from a product background, I've come from the sales and marketing and the business development background and the technology background. So I'm kind of been across the whole lot. But in terms of like structuring my thinking around the business and around the way things work, I just don't have a framework for it. It's just not something that that's really fascinating. But hey, I was going to say, you mentioned we talked about product quite a lot, and product businesses, obviously, because a lot of our clients, both yours and mine, are product-oriented, product-driven businesses. I met recently John Moore, who from the Silicon Valley Product Group. If anyone's listening and knows Marty Kagan, he's part of that general crowd. There's the book, but he's in the background. But basically, I went to an event with that whole team in London, learned a whole lot of stuff. Really good. But one of the we talked about you, because we he knows we didn't talk about you for hours. We talked about you briefly. I don't want to make you paranoid, but what he mentioned is that, and because we were talking with the whole group about what do we, as because we're all product coaches, right? All product leaders, coaches, or transformation coaches with a product background. That's why we were there. Coach the coaches session it was. And we were talking about like who do we work with and what kinds of adjacent services are there to what we do. And people talked about there's agile type coaching, there's leadership coaching, there's none of that, all this sort of stuff. And I said, well, what about people coaching? And I know this great people coach being Janie. And I said, and John knows her as well. And John said, yeah, Janie's one of the most product oriented, switched on people I've ever met. And you worked with him for years at Trainline, right? During the massive transformation as well. Is that where you picked up your product knowledge, or did you bring that, or how did you become a producty?
I learned a huge amount from John and his wider team. Yeah, 100%. I mean, he was a fantastic leader to partner with, and we drove a lot of change around how to set up a business for growth during that time. So no, that's absolutely where I got the depth of my knowledge.
Right. Sure. So he was impressed with you that you learned from him. but the same,
exactly.
Yeah, which I think is natural when you have a great leader like John. But I mean, this is where, like, a lot of the things, I've learned a whole lot from various people, Marty and John being two people that I've learned from very, very recently. But you learn a lot of these things from people, and it just becomes part of who you are, and then it is who you are, and now you've got that knowledge and that way of doing things.
Yeah, absolutely. But maybe coming on to leadership qualities, because I think I really do believe that curiosity, when I was in a functional leadership role, or whether I'm advising other leaders, I think having the natural curiosity to dig into what you're working with is one of the greatest strengths I think a leader can have.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because there are playbooks. Of course, there's playbooks that exist, and of course, every stage founder wants to copy and paste the playbook to get to the result quickly. But I have a really firm belief that whilst there's pattern recognition, certainly in the people space, that hugely exists in terms of how to build out people functions. I don't believe in the cookie cutter approach. I think the how of how companies and leaders do that is unique to their business because of the makeup of the leadership teams at that point. So that's really where the idea for me to set up as in a consulting advisory capacity came from, because the books are fantastic, and the stories and the podcasts and everything that supports our learning. But until you're that leader in that seat, making those decisions or developing that strategy, it's not quite the same as when Monzo did it over here or Trainline did it over there.
Yeah.
So.
You can't just take the whole. I mean, this is the same thing that I do with OKRs with leadership teams. I always start with who are you and what problems are you trying to solve, and so on. In fact, I do this. I find this really interesting, just as a general business thing as a consultant. Largely, my sales pitch is understanding the problems that they have, and I spend most of my time on the problems that they have, and then we talk about how we're going to adapt the solution to that. But I don't pitch, here's what's my solution. And one of the things I often end up having to explain to my customers is, no, we're not going to do OKRs the way Google does it, because you're different. And they realize that very quickly. It's an interesting sort of a stereotype that people have. Like, people often talk about adopting the Spotify model, even though Spotify doesn't use that model anymore. But I mean, we adopt the Spotify model. It's like, well, what about you? What's your problems? What are you doing? And how do we adapt it to you? And it's the same thing that I do with my customers with OKRs. And it's the same thing that you do with people, even though people is like, in some sense, people are people everywhere, but you have different people and different cultures and different strategies and different businesses and so on going on. And interestingly enough, it's even the same for, this is a very fundamental product concept of like doing discovery and understanding what the problem is so you can build the right product. And we do the same thing with our business with that, and also with what we do for our customers. You have to do the same product-like discovery process, right?
And I'm smiling as you're saying that, because I was using that exact phrase in a workshop earlier this week for a client where we're building out our leveling and progression framework for them. It's part of a broader piece of work. And actually, I was joking that I didn't have post-it notes. It was all remote, and I didn't have post-it notes, so I was just scribbling down a piece of paper. But I felt like I was in a product discovery session, because here's a hypothesis. Do you think this is going to work? Do you think it's not? What would you change? What would brilliance look like here? What do we need to work up? What do we need to work down, etc. So it's really the comparison.
Great, you mentioned leveling, by the way, because I was talking to a friend of mine who's in a startup, and it's a really large startup. And maybe we wouldn't even call it a startup anymore. But they're in the thousands of people, and they've only just introduced leveling. And leveling, for those of you who don't know, maybe Janie's better at explaining this, but to my mind, as someone who's not a people professional, leveling is all about just having an understanding of which the different sort of like levels of experience in an organization and how that fits into a career ladder, so that I, as a engineer, know that I'm an engineer 1, and then once I do this type of work or get that kind of responsibility, I get to be an engineer 2 or a senior engineer or whatever else I would be. And this is how I become a staff engineer, or this is where I go to be a manager or a senior manager or whatever, what skills I need to present. But what she said that was really interesting is that leveling's been really helpful. It's helping. We can see how it's helping. It's causing a lot of pain, because as you implement it, it's painful, because suddenly people realize I'm a 1 and they're a 2. What's going on? It just distracts everyone for a while as everyone discovers what levels everyone is at. But she said that one thing, the advice that she had is do leveling earlier than what they did, much earlier. And she didn't know when or why. But I'd love to ask you that question: when should you do leveling, and why? What problem are we solving here, and why are we doing leveling? And do you have anything else to add to what I just explained about what leveling is? Maybe you want to correct me.
No, that's all totally spot on. I mean, leveling, what you've described, the biggest output from leveling is a progression or career pathway framework. But leveling is used and can be really helpful for lots of other things as an organization scales. Back to your contact, absolutely. I'm sure it's pain with a capital P, doing it at over 1,000 people, because there's 1,000 minds to readjust to something they might not have thought that existed in terms of where they sat in the organization.
It's about identity as well, isn't it? Like it's not just about changing something outside of me. It's about changing who I am as a person. I thought that I thought that I had this role because that's what my job title says, but actually I'm an engineer. I'm a senior engineer. I thought that I was more important than that. And that kind of thing. It's like it's a really identity based.
It's very nuanced leveling, and unpicking role titles to level titles to etc., which is a whole other topic. But with the leveling and what stage to introduce it at, it is one of the most fundamental pieces a company should do. I would say about 50, 60 people plus. So really early. And often companies don't do it that early. I think for a really main reason is they think it's introducing a hierarchy. So I don't need it, because I don't need it in my organization, because we know who everybody is and we know what we're doing. Absolutely right at that point, well, just about when you get to 50. And also I want to have empowered teams, flat structures, and all the great snippets that go with these ways of working. Actually, what leveling does, it can sit in the background if you don't want to launch it in your organization early, but what it does is set expectations clearly. It's an expectation setting tool, really, around what are the factors that you want to measure success against within your organization. Is strategic impact or business impact important to us and enough as an organization to call it out as something that should be in our progression framework? You had one particular scaling company who is over 1,000 now that did this about 600 that I worked for a couple of years ago, and they were particularly keen on calling out learning as one of their factors. So what's important to the organization is very unique to that leadership team and company at that point. But building it to scale is what you want to do, because then you've got a framework, which is a guide. It's not going to solve everybody's tick box answers, but it's a guide to enable managers and employees to have a really sensible conversation around what's expected of me in my role at a certain level and what's expected of me at a level up within that function or across in another function. So it brings transparency. It's a bit back to values and principles. It brings transparency, it brings consistency, it brings expectation setting, it brings fairness around how you reward decisions on top of it. And linking to the work that you do, Richard, on OKRs, it helps set goals clearly from a development point of view.
Yeah. Yeah, people goals and so just one of my experiences with leveling, like I remember at Google, I feel like we didn't have really explicit leveling. I knew we had it; it existed, but it wasn't as openly or as honest as as open to people as it was when I started in 2006. Pretty sure we knew what our level was, but we didn't know what anyone else's level was. At some point in time, that became, at least within the engineering ladders, everyone could access the levels of everyone else, and you could see what level it was. Now, one of the reasons for that was so that you could then set the expectations, all about expectation setting, but basically say, yes, you're a level 4. To get to level 5, you need to do these behaviors, such as what these people are doing. Right? And you can sort of see who around you is level 5. Those are the people that I need to be. If I'm talking about bigger impact, well, what impact are they having, and how do I have the same impact they're having? And once you see that, it becomes easier. At Amazon, I was at Amazon for 2 years, and Amazon has very conscious leveling, and they have a slightly bizarre leveling in that CEO is 12, SVP, there's about 20 of them who's 11, and then there's like VPs at 10, which is, there's probably 300 or 400, maybe 500 VPs. And then there's nobody at 9. There's no level 9. And then, and that's because they don't want middle managers. And then there's level 8, which is director, and so on. It goes down like that. But these levels are really broad. So your compensation range, even in the same city with the same role, the same level, could be 50% different within a level. And then you go up to a level and it's like, it's broader again and bigger again. But you're very conscious of what's happening. And so the way we talk about getting things done in Amazon was all about, when you have a meeting, one of the main questions is, do we have any L8s in the meeting? Like, and we ask who's the director, and do we have a director in the meeting? Because that makes it a bigger impact meeting and a high. If we have an L10 and a VP in the meeting, the document has got to be good because it's got an L10 in the meeting and so on. And everyone knew this, and it was like a really clear. Sorry?
I mean, I think if organizations, certainly at the earlier stages, are going for the merit-based recognition of, we're going to reward based on actually the great work and performance outcomes that you have, then actually this is about the language that helps set expectation rather than the number.
Rather than what? Sorry?
Rather than the number of the level. Rather than L1, L2, L3, L4. But without it, you're basically navigating vagary. It's very hard for managers to manage without it, in my view.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, certainly, as I say, at Amazon, it was very much like one of the things that we did, which was really helpful for, we had the expectation setting for the individuals, but in all of the career type conversations, we'd have like an OLR, an organizational leadership review, which is like how you review your teams and do the performance assessment, promotion reviews, hiring reviews. And even when you're talking about firing someone or getting rid of things, so that's the hiring, firing, rewards, and promotion type topics. All of those things, one of the ways that you were taught to do this is, as managers, was say, this person is a level 6 or a level 5 or whatever they are. They're a level 5 software engineer. Like that's important. Right? So, and what I expect from a level 5 software engineer is this, and this. And what I'm seeing is this, and this. And this is how we would help to calibrate people. It wasn't so much about calibrating this person against that person. It was about calibrating leaders against an understanding of what the level is and what behaviors and what the performance, what the outcomes of someone at that level is, what the impact is of someone at that level. And then we were taught you have to actually express as a manager what you're expecting at that level, and you have to be good at that. And then you have to calibrate that expectation. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Articulation of it. Look, there's taking out lots of playing conditions and politics and game playing that might exist in such type meetings. I think for me, when I think about leveling, it's all about keeping it simple. So you want to right size the leveling for the size of organization. You want to have the content that's highly relevant to the organization, and then it will be used.
Right. So you can't just copy Amazon's levels, right? That doesn't make sense for a smaller company. Just like you can't copy OKRs from Google.
Correct. 100%. 100% the case. So it's really useful looking at, and it informs reward decisions, and it informs It can inform equity distribution to ensure there's fairness. It can inform career progression, but I think when some of the pains that scaling companies have, that when you say we don't want middle management, actually, this is much earlier businesses, I see when companies don't focus in on building a strong middle management layer and developing them well, they don't scale as well because everything gets bottlenecked at the leadership group. And they just say we want to delegate, but they don't have strong enough leaders beneath them to do it or managers to do it. So there is, and even if you've only got a 3-level management leadership hierarchy, you've got to develop the people to be able to have these skills. Have the honest, upfront, right conversations. Because if you sit on conversation, if you spot stuff and don't have the brave conversations early on in scaling tech companies, you carry problems forever.
Right? Yeah, that's true. I mean, just on the topic of middle management, I mean, Amazon had this belief. I don't know why they had this belief, but it's a very common belief that middle management equals bad. As middle managers are bureaucrats and so on, because a lot of large organizations, that's where a lot of dead weight is in a lot of large organizations. But you're absolutely right in that you need to invest in these people who are between the exec level and the doing level and the director level and so on. You need to have these people who are really capable. And if you do that, the power of the multiplication you get of what the impact we're getting through this team is enormous. And Amazon definitely does have those people. For some reason, they don't have a level 9, but they do have those people, and they're doing that work.
But typically in the earlier stage businesses, the managers are player managers. It's quite rare that they're only managers of managers, right? Because they are an overhead. That was probably what Amazon's getting, right? They are an overhead, and that's not always helpful, certainly in a lean scaling headcount business.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that makes sense. Hey, you mentioned also about OKRs and performance reviews. Now, I have a particular view on OKRs, and we were talking about leveling and promotions and rewards and so on. And I have a particular view on the way OKRs should work in relation to that. And I'll expound that briefly, but I'm keen on your opinion on this and how it relates to leveling, for example. I don't usually advise my customers to do individual OKRs or individual goals, or at least not as a policy. I think that they can be really helpful for people, and they're certainly, any individual needs to know what they're trying to achieve and what their success is, and whether you use OKRs to do that or something else, or just regular conversations, it's fine. And it helps to have it written down. But I don't always advise get OKRs everywhere. I tend to work with use OKRs primarily as a direction setting tool, and to sort of say, here's a direction and here's what success looks like. And now when you're working, you can talk about what you've done in relation to how much impact that had on the success criteria. Like, what did you do that helped deliver success? But one of the things that often comes up, and this is a universal sort of OKR belief, is that you should not use, if you do have individual OKRs, you should not use the OKR score as a performance review, right? So it's not, you didn't achieve your goals and therefore you get a big bonus or whatever it is, or you get a promotion because you achieved your goals. Because all that does, and this is the hypothesis I'm kind of interested in your view on, all that does is moves all the subjectivity in assessing someone and work, and subjectivity is always the case, especially outside of sales and pure operational stuff. You've got subjectivity everywhere. How big impact was it? How hard was it? And all that sort of stuff. You're moving all that subjectivity from the end, when you have some context and you've worked with this person and you know what the constraints were and the barriers were. You're moving that to the start when you didn't know, and all you're doing is you're setting goals without knowing what the problems were, and then you're trying to set a sort of like a review before you have the context, and so it's subjective yet without the things to be subjective about.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of feel for the purposes of a good chat, we should say no, I disagree. But actually, I do. I'm pretty aligned in the sense that OKRs work best when they're at company or team level, or however they want to break down function, but also not individual. The OKR work is an input to the performance review. Is one of the contextual, maybe as you're saying, the contextual inputs to the how have I got on? What broadly were my targets? Now, it might be that some of my goals that my manager and I have set together are derived from the OKR's work. Absolutely fine. But the dependency and success of that one project being successful can't be tied to that one individual, because it's a team effort in the OKR. So what you can say is, I mean, this question was asked quite a lot in a previous life but if the OKR goal wasn't met, but the individual did a brilliant performance to get really close to it being met, could they still be a high performer?
Yeah.
And the answer to that was yes, because they might have displayed, going back to the capabilities or progression framework, they might have displayed all the different things at their level that are expected of them, and that should be recognised. It should be noted that the result wasn't realised and understood as to why not, but it can't be on the result only and purely isolation as to whether they have a high performance rating or not.
Yeah, I mean, at some point in time, like it's interesting because like Steve Jobs had this, and I think it was Steve Jobs. It may have been one of his predecessors at Apple, but he had this saying of like somewhere between the janitor and the CEO, excuses cease to matter, and all that matters is results, and that's the only thing that matters. And to a degree, that's always true because as a CEO, you ride on the results that you generate, and that's what matters in the long-term results and the stock price and the revenue and the profit and things like that. And as you go down the chain, you've got, there's responsibility for that really matters. But at the same time, when you're assessing people, there's got to be some element of understanding. If the janitor, for example, his example was that the janitor, the cleaner, if the cleaner doesn't have a key to the room, they can't clean the room. Well, that's not their fault. It's the problem of the system that didn't give them the key to the room. But at some point in time, it ceases to matter, and you have to solve that problem. And it's really interesting sort of thinking about that in relation to compensation and performance reviews.
So I think if you want that structure, then don't have OKRs. If you want individual accountability, then if you want absolutely 100% purely on results only, I wouldn't set it up with OKRs. You'd have very defined individual goals that you try and link back. And sure, there's always an element of, but that was the team and that might not have just been me. But it's not communicated in a way that's all about the objective outcome. So I think but there's the subjectivity.
This is, I mean, one of the ways that the way that Amazon does this, at least, and certainly I talk about Amazon because that was my last big company, but a lot of companies do it, was with equity. And this is the reasons you have equity at these top levels of the organization, is because no matter what, that's the result that ends up mattering for the business. And so we don't necessarily have to give a bonus or increase your salary or anything like that, because you've got the equity. As long as you've got the right level of equity, you've got the equity, and that's your interest. And so now you're aligned because you're an owner of the company, and that's a fundamental belief of Jeff Bezos. And so my advice to people, I mean, I'm not involved in that, but it does always come up because people think of, especially in Europe, they think of OKRs as being a mechanism to have a number that I can then derive a individual bonus from. But if you can transition from that to having, let's have everyone have equity, and now everyone has the ownership interest as well. And if you're senior, you have a higher percentage of ownership interest compared to your salary. If you're junior, you have a smaller amount, but you're acting like an owner. And now what matters is, are we following the objective and the key result? Are we delivering the results that we said we wanted to do? Are we going in the right direction? And my reward is based on, well, how well did the company do?
Yeah. So it's a great summary of the theory. I think the practice is a little bit different, because the market conditions that we have now in terms of the talent market, where cash has been king over equity in terms of people moving and salaries increasing, etc., etc.
Right. Is that a European thing? Is that particularly more so in Europe and UK than the US, or is that
been all over? So, I mean, as a result of COVID, linked to this great resignation, etc. The inflation or the increases of tech salaries is gone up hugely. Look, and maybe based on the perhaps the heyday of limitless investment, slowing, certainly the salary market will start to lower and deflate a little bit. The challenge that I think with the theory doesn't match the practice is at the lower levels. A lot of organizations went for the principle of equality, which I think is obviously good. It's a good thing where everybody gets equity. But actually, what is important to people at the earlier stage of the career, they want cash to put deposit down for a house. They might be getting married. They want, maybe they want to go on a luxurious travel holiday or take a sabbatical to go travel. It is, but cash tends to be king at the more junior ends.
Yeah, that's true.
So we said you've got to be a little bit careful at leadership level. You set up all the principles and the frameworks, but if the market conditions aren't right, the practice isn't quite. You might have then distributed equity to people that will operate like they're an owner, but not because of equity. don't know if this is controversial or not, but that's what I see, because actually what helps someone act like an owner is a great leader who understands their team, who understands what motivates them, and can give them really interesting work to work on, meaningful, right? We know this in terms of purpose nowadays, but purposeful, meaningful work to work on is what is keeping people from a retention point of view.
That's true. It's interesting. When I think back to my early career at whether it's Deutsche Bank or Google and so on, certainly cash was king, because it was very much about let's pay the rent this month and let's make sure I have enough money to go out and do what I'm doing, have holidays, fly to Australia, whatever I need to do on my holiday, and all that sort of stuff. And sort of made a massive difference. And but also looking at the compensation package that I remember having, stock was a relatively smaller part of it as well. But also I had relatively little impact on the stock because I was one person among 3,000-4,000 people or whatever it was. And then when I was more senior at Amazon, the stock was a bigger impact, and it meant more to me. The cash was enough to pay things, but then it's like, okay, the stock's like, okay, that's my retirement package. That's how I save for
you raise a good point, because actually you're saying it shouldn't be that just because they're not valuing it today, they might not value it tomorrow.
Yeah, true. It's interesting. I guess that relates to leveling as well. I mean, the leveling thing is, the sort of more junior levels, you end up with a smaller percentage of stock, and as you get to sort of senior manager, you might be 50% of your compensation is stock, and that's quite important. But you can handle that because you've got enough salary, and you own your maybe you do, maybe you own your house, maybe you don't, but you kind of got past that first bump. Usually, hopefully, at least for most people at that level. We're coming up to being out of time, but I wanted to ask you, there were two things that I was thinking about that I'd love to ask you about. And that was basically about your advice for companies about setting up what you called a talent engine. What's the fundamental thing that you do when you're starting at an organization, when you're coming up with the talent engine? And then I wanted to talk, if we could, about coaching, but I'm not sure whether we have time for that. But let's talk about talent engines.
So look, you've got to have a good talent team. You've got to have the right size talent team, and you've got to have the right talent partners, externally, or perhaps bringing them in through an embedded model. But have the right setup of your talent team with the realistic targets that they can hire to hit your hiring volumes. So we think we can hire X number of heads per recruiter per month. Multiplied by X, we're going to be able to hit that target. Simple math, but do it, and then continue to reiterate it based on the data from your, hopefully, second point, your strong applicant tracking system, your recruiting system, that does it does provide good analytics, because you need to stay on top of the data to make sure you're spotting what's happening in your hiring funnels. So to make that engine work.
So that's very much like the engine side, which is, I guess, that's the function part. Which is that what you refer to as an engine? I guess because you also have the work that the hiring managers and the people who are the colleagues do.
So for me, the talent team are the enablers to the engine. So where you've got to check how you can optimize the recruiting process. So through a number of stages, quality of questions, consistency of questions, assessments that's required. Everything that's in that. How do you debrief? How quickly do you make decisions? All the SLAs, that whole process piece for me is a given. That has to be streamlined.
Right.
I think the nuances I'm calling out around having the right system is really key. If you're still on spreadsheets or a system that you don't pull data from, it's going to slow you down. If you don't have the right recruiters in the right places with the right skills and experience that can source the right way, they're going to slow you down. And I think the other thing that slows you down is, I touched upon this around org, is early on getting the hiring justification for that role right. So why do I need that role now?
Yeah.
Because if you can get that sorted, then you're not going to then waste time that recruiters, and this still happens a lot, work on roles that, we met a bunch of candidates, we met 10 candidates, and we like 2 of them. Oh, no, neither of them are quite right, because actually that's not what you're looking for. You don't need 10 candidates to find out that's not what you're looking for. So get your hiring justification right and set your bar at the right level. So know what Right.
I guess that setting the bar at the right level and even justifying or finding the right type of person is related to leveling as well. Because like I know that again, this is I talk about Amazon a lot because it was 2 years of my life, but it's like dog years, so this feels like 15 years. Right? But basically they had this because they have this strong leveling culture. Whenever you're hiring someone or deciding to hire someone, one of the biggest questions is what level of person do you need? Do you need a level 4 or do you need a level 6 to this? Or no, that's a level 7 scope because we need someone who's going to have that kind of impact. So therefore you're hiring a level 7. And then whenever I talk to anyone else ex Amazon, if we're ever talking about a person, like we need to hire a person or whatever like that, like I would actually quite like someone in my organization, in my business, to help me with marketing and some other things sometimes, or various topics that I work on. One of the things that I think about is what is the equivalent level that I'm thinking about in terms of the amount of initiative that they have. And I just think in that framework now, it doesn't go away.
No, I mean, leveling is a great proxy when it's done well for shorthanding what. But leveling can help. But you can also make sure just watch companies or leaders don't get lazy about it, and they don't then go, "Add a level 4, I'll take another level 4." Re-justify why you want that role to look like that in today's company. Why?
So it's like, why do I need why a level 4 for this role in this particular situation with this team? What's going on? What are the reasons you need level 4? Why not 5? Why not 3? What's going on?
Yeah, if I've had a 4 for 3 years, do I still need a 4 when I'm replacing them, or do I need a 5 or a 3? Well, actually, what would I do if I reshaped my team slightly different? And that's where the org piece continues to evolve. When I mention org, people often think it's org change equals redundancies. Org change is just making sure that your organization is set up for success to deliver what you want to do with the heads that you've got. Doesn't mean that you have to take heads.
Yeah, that's interesting because I often think that if you get great people, they're often quite movable. Like, I mean, especially the more senior you get, even if you've come up through a function and you've got a very functional head. I mean, even when I coach my customers, the exec team customers, we often talk about there's a person who's like maybe head of engineering who's always been in engineering, but actually the conversations that they're having as head of engineering are about product and marketing and people and finance and business and sales and all that sort of stuff. That's the conversation you're having in that meeting. You're not merely representing engineering at that level, at the leadership level, right?
Yeah.
So as you get more senior, you need to be broader anyway. And then
Right.
what that means is when you're shifting people around, you need people who are capable of operating in the right kind of in movable roles, to some degree.
And that's really, for me, a second on coaching. That's exactly what a lot of the leadership coaching work is around. Either I am here and I want to be over there, or the business working with the leader saying, look, you're great at engineering and you're dabbling in product, but actually, how do we get you to be even more commercial in our exec meetings?
Yeah, that's such a tough one for so in many technical people. Like, how do I be commercial? Well, but I'm not commercial. I'm an engineer. But that's the purpose of what you're doing as an executive or as a senior leader. You need to understand the commercials, and just like you need to understand the product and the commercials of your business, even as a people leader.
It's the IQ, EQ, and everyone says, gosh, we need our IQ leaders to be greater in EQ and EQ leaders to be smarter with their data and more analytical, etc. For me, it's all about dialing up what you need at a certain point in time. But you've got to be aware to know how to do that. And a lot of the work I do in the one-to-one coaching is helping bring the self-awareness really to the fore for the individuals, because they sort of know it in the background, but actually what do we need to unearth quite quickly to then get into that practical solution molds that helps them deliver what they want to deliver, be it behavioural change or a particular role outcome. Whatever.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's really about keeping their coaching really pragmatic about what you're actually trying to achieve, right? Like, you could linking it back to what we talked about at the very start about driving the whole, like, what are you trying to do, and how does what you're doing help you do this, and challenging you based on your capabilities and to grow the capability you need to have to do what you need to do.
Yeah. And why do you want to do it? Back to the big old why question. Why do you want to do it? Because certainly COVID has taught us all life is too short to be doing something that you think you should be doing, but you don't really want to be doing.
Yeah, exactly. Well, look, I think we've come up to it's been 50 minutes, and I've really enjoyed this conversation. I feel like we could go on, and I like that about you. I like that it's great to talk to you about these things. But we've also brought it back to the start, and we've linked it back together again really well. And so thanks for that. But do you have, like, I'm going to put you on the spot with a question, which is basically, what's your top advice for anyone who's watching? If you're a CEO, a senior leader, a people leader in a startup around that 50 to 500 people mark, 50 to 2,000 person mark, and they're watching you, if you were to say abstractly, and I know you haven't done the discovery, you don't know what the specific problem is, but generally, what's the biggest piece of advice that you'd give to people, or a couple of top tips that you'd give to people in those roles?
So I think it's quite hard to summarize, I think, but let me give it a go. CEOs, founders, leaders, assuming you're not a first time leader overall, which I assume not if you're in one of those positions, there's a good chance you've seen the pattern recognition playbook start to evolve. And when you see it, call it out and deal with it early. It might be about a person, but it might be about a way of working, or it might be about a problem. But really tune in to what you are seeing. Don't just be in the detail of the problem. So stand back and review and say, listen, what do I think is going on here?
So challenge yourself. Don't just use the pattern recognition. That's helpful, but look at what's actually happening in the situation here. What's really going on.
Use the pattern recognition to challenge yourself. Don't just go, we've seen this before and this is how it happened, which I see quite a lot. But actually then go and act on it quickly. I'm a bit of a pragmatist, so act on it. And I think my advice to HR leaders or CEOs building out HR teams is get a strong team in place fast, because all this stuff that we've talked about, I hope, and I do see now actually that investors and leaders now see huge value in quality people teams. But getting the right mix of skills and having a plan together, do that as early as possible, even slightly ahead of time. And your finance team will be uncomfortable with that for sure, but do it slightly ahead of time, because you can build a lot of the infrastructure at the right point and reduce the time and pain points hugely as you scale.
Yeah,
so think ahead of
time. That's because I think that people is one of those things that has such a long-term impact on a business, and it's such a long lever to pull. You have to pull it before you have the pain. Some of the things, one of my common advice to people is don't solve problems you don't have. But people, it's one of those things where you kind of, the lever is such a long lever. It takes a long time for it to have an effect. There are things you can do that have immediate effect. Coaching is one of them. But there's there's a lot of these things. It takes a while to set this up and make it have an effect and have it invest for the future. It really is a long term.
Evolution takes 12, 18 months, 2 years. There's no quick fixes to culture evolution. There's short-term band-aids, but not much more.
For sure. Well, look, Janie, thanks very much for the conversation.
Thank you.
If anyone does want to get in contact with Janie, I'll put her contact details, or she'll be linked on LinkedIn. Wherever you're seeing this, there'll be some links to her. But you can look for Janie Links or highcaliberpeople.com. Is it .com or .uk?
You can come to the website or on LinkedIn.
Highcaliberpeople.com. Okay, and it's caliber spelled correctly, not American style, yes?
Yeah, it's spelled English.
Excellent. All right, cool. Well, thanks, Janie. Thanks very much. I'll stop the recording here, and we'll have a chat afterwards, right?
Thanks, Richard.